Hey everyone, ready for a fascinating deep dive? You sent in some really interesting stuff about International Workers' Day and powerful English vocabulary. We're diving into a transcript from Podcast Speak English. It's a YouTube channel that teaches English using these fun little role-playing scenarios like we're stepping right into a virtual classroom.
It's amazing how they managed to connect a simple holiday to these broader themes like labor rights and social movements. It really shows how language evolves alongside these societal shifts.
It's true, it's all connected. So this episode, we're basically dropped right into a history class.
Yeah.
The teacher's talking about how crucial it is to understand the genesis of legal systems.
Yeah, Genesis, it's a great word. It's not just about learning the laws themselves, right? It's about grasping where they came from, their origins, the whole context.
Like understanding the why gives the what so much more weight. Okay, so the teacher starts by painting this picture of the 19th century. Working conditions were absolutely, and I quote, appalling.
Appalling.
Workers were forced to work 10, 12, even 14 hours a day.
That's unimaginable. Appalling isn't just bad, it's shockingly, terribly bad.
Yeah, it definitely evokes a strong reaction. And it's this awful reality that fuels this movement for an 8-hour workday. The transcript mentioned some union leaders. They showed some indifference and hostility toward the idea. But even with that pushback, by April 1886, 250,000 workers, they were involved in this May Day movement.
It's interesting how much resistance there always seems to be to change, even when it's for the better. That word hostility, it implies more than just disagreement, right? It suggests this potential for aggression, even violence. This wasn't a peaceful debate.
Totally. And that brings us to May 1st, 1886. This pivotal moment. A resolution's passed, making 8 hours a legal workday. Huge, right? I mean, we're still feeling the impact of that decision today.
Absolutely. It's remarkable how these events from over a century ago continue to shape our world, really underscores the lasting impact of those social movements.
Okay, so now the YouTube lesson switches gears a bit. Get ready for some high-level vocabulary. They introduce words like drastic measures, brutality.
It's not random, though. These words are specifically chosen to really drive home the impact of these events. Drastic measures, for example, emphasizes the extreme actions taken by those workers and activists to achieve their goals.
Desperate times call for drastic measures.
Right. And Marco and Erica, the hosts, they're great at breaking these words down, giving examples like the president was forced to take drastic measures to solve the crisis.
It's not just definitions. They equip you to actually use these words.
Okay, let's unpack some of them. We have drastic measures, but we also have brutality aspect. Not enough to simply, would constitute. Where do we even begin?
Well, brutality, that one's particularly powerful. It speaks directly to that violence and oppression faced by workers during this time. Remember the quote from the transcript? Police fired into a crowd of strikers at the McCormack Reaper Works factory, killing 4 and wounding many.
It's just awful.
Using brutality to describe that event, it underscores the severity of the situation. Paints a disturbing picture, that's for sure. Then there's aspect, used when talking about the legal system. An important aspect of becoming a good citizen is understanding the genesis of our legal system.
Right. Aspect is a great way to highlight a specific part of something, a feature. It encourages us to look deeper, consider all the different components of this larger whole.
It's like saying, hey, there's more to this than meets the eye.
Exactly.
Okay, not enough to simply feel like I use this one all the time.
It pushes for more effort, more action. Like, it's not enough to simply learn about history. You have to apply those lessons to the present.
Absolutely. Okay, grammar time. Let's talk would constitute. They use it when talking about the 8-hour workday resolution. Let's see. 8 hours would constitute a legal day's work.
That's a subtle use of the future in the past tense. It's describing a future event, but from a point in the past. It's like the resolution was passed in the past, right?
Right.
But it establishes the 8-hour workday as this future reality.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's like a time-traveling tense.
You got it.
Okay, so we've unpacked these amazing vocabulary words, but it's important to keep the bigger picture in mind, right? This YouTube video is very U.S.-centric, but International Workers' Day is a global event.
Absolutely. And it's celebrated on a much larger scale in many other countries. It's a public holiday, a day to celebrate the achievements of workers and to advocate for their rights.
It's interesting that they mentioned that May Day IS celebrated in Canada just not on May 1st. It's actually the first weekend in September. And then in Ecuador, well, they celebrate on May 1st. They have another holiday in May, the Battle of Pichincha on the 24th. 2 holidays in 1 month. Lucky them.
It just highlights how different cultures have chosen to commemorate and integrate these historical events into their own social calendars.
It makes you wonder why the U.S. decided to go a different route and not officially recognize May Day. What are the historical and political factors that shaped that decision?
That's a great question, one that definitely deserves a deeper look.
Totally. We've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover about the nuances and complexities of International Workers' Day.
Welcome back to our deep dive on International Workers' Day.
You guys have given us some really fascinating material to work with.
It's true. It's amazing how a seemingly simple holiday, right, can spark so many interesting questions and discussions.
Right. It really speaks to the enduring power of these historical events and how relevant they still are to this day. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about how differently May Day is celebrated around the world. You mentioned it's a much bigger deal in some countries than it is in the U.S. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are probably a few factors at play. First, there's the historical context. In a lot of countries, May Day is tied closely to socialist and labor movements, which have played a larger role in their political and social development.
It's interesting because in the U.S., May Day often gets kind of lumped in with socialist or communist ideologies, which might be why it's not widely celebrated here.
That's a good point. The association with left-wing politics has definitely influenced how it's been received in the United States. But it's important to remember that at its core, May Day is about celebrating the contributions of workers and advocating for their rights. And those are universal values. They go beyond any specific political ideology.
For sure. It's a day to recognize all the people who keep society going. The teachers, the nurses, the factory workers, the delivery drivers, everyone who works hard to make our lives better.
Exactly. And I think in those countries, the ones where labor unions have a stronger presence and there's more emphasis on social welfare, May Day has this more celebratory and unifying tone. It's a day for workers to get together, show solidarity, and really push for more progress.
Let's talk about different perspectives. One thing that struck me in that podcast Speak English episode was their discussion of the word proletariat.
Yes. Proletariat. That's a term packed with historical and political baggage.
They basically say it just means the working class, the lowest socioeconomic class. But it's not just a neutral term, is it?
Not at all. Proletariat is closely tied to Marxist theory and the idea of class struggle. It brings up images of factories, labor unions, revolutionary movements.
It just highlights how much power language has.
Yeah.
Some words carry so much weight, positive and negative.
It's true. Words are more than tools for communication. They're also weapons, shields, symbols even. The way to use language, it shapes how we see the world and how we interact with each other.
That's a great point. Okay, back to International Workers' Day. It's clearly a pretty complex holiday with all sorts of different interpretations and meanings. In some places it's about celebration and solidarity, and in others it's more about protest and activism.
And those interpretations are often shaped by a country's own unique history, its political climate, its cultural values. There's no single universal understanding of May Day.
It's so interesting to think about how the same event can be remembered so differently. In some countries, May Day rallies and marches are just a normal sight. But in the U.S., those kinds of demonstrations, well, they're not as frequent.
That's an interesting observation. I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier. In countries where labor movements have historically had a more prominent role, there's this bigger tradition of using May Day as a day for action, for collective action and public demonstration.
Right. And in those places, the word rally, well, it has a very specific meaning. It's not just a get-together. It's a show of solidarity, a call for change.
Absolutely. And then there's the word proclamation. It often comes up when you're talking about May Day.
Oh, yeah, right. In the video, they say that the resolution to make 8 hours a legal workday was a type of proclamation, this formal announcement, declaring workers' rights.
Think of it as a public statement, one that's trying to inform or persuade or even inspire action. It's a way to get your message out there loudly.
I can just picture, a labor leader issuing a proclamation calling for workers to come together, to demand better conditions. It's a powerful tool for mobilization.
It is. And then, of course, you have memorials.
Memorials, you mean like the monuments and statues that are dedicated to the labor movement?
Exactly. They serve as physical reminders, of the sacrifices made by everyone who fought for workers' rights. They honor the past and hopefully inspire us to keep fighting for a more just and equitable future.
It's interesting, right? The different ways we choose to remember events and figures. Some cultures might prefer these big statues and monuments, and others, well, they might go for something more subtle or symbolic.
And those choices reflect cultural values
Yeah.
and artistic traditions. A memorial isn't just an object, it represents how a community remembers and interprets the past.
This is getting deep, but I like it. It's amazing to see how a holiday like International Workers' Day can get us thinking about so many different things: history, language, culture.
It really is. And I think that's what's so great about learning. It's a journey, it's constantly expanding how we see ourselves and the world around us.
I could agree more. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one more word from the YouTube video I wanted to mention. Fire into. It's a phrase that's stuck with me. It has so much power and a dark history. We're back, and honestly, that phrase "fire into" has been stuck in my head. It's so visceral. You can almost feel the danger and the chaos.
It's a phrase that takes you right to those moments, the conflict, the violence. And as we know, those moments were all too real for the workers fighting for their rights during the May Day movement.
Right. Remember that part in the role play where the teacher describes what happened on May 3rd, 1886. Police fired into a crowd of strikers at the McCormick Reaper Works factory, killing 4 and wounding many.
Chilling, right?
It really is.
It reminds us of the brutality that workers faced, just for demanding fair treatment. And fired into, those words, they're not just describing a physical act. They highlight this deliberate use of force, a complete disregard for human life. It's a scary example of how power can be used to suppress anyone who disagrees.
It makes you think about how brave those workers were, to stand up for themselves knowing the risks. They were literally putting their lives on the line for something they believed in.
And that's why the fight for workers' rights is so crucial. It's about dignity, respect, the right to a safe workplace for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the history of May Day, the words we use to describe it, and how differently it's celebrated around the world. But what about today? How is May Day relevant in the 21st century?
That's a great question. The challenges workers face today might be different than those faced back in the 19th century. But those core issues, fair wages, safe working conditions, and the right to organize, they're just as important now as they were then.
It's not just a day to remember the past then, is it?
Not at all.
It's a reminder that the struggle for workers' rights is ongoing, that we have to keep pushing for progress.
Absolutely. Globalization, automation,
Hmm.
the rise of the gig economy, all these things have created new obstacles for workers. And May Day, well, it's a reminder that we need to address these issues.
It's like a reminder that the fight isn't over. We have to keep working to make sure everyone has access to a workplace that's fair and just.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And, it's also important to remember that workers' rights, well, they're connected to all these other social justice issues. Racial equality, gender equality, environmental sustainability.
It's all connected. It's all part of creating a more just world for everyone.
That's right.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into International Workers' Day, what are some key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that May Day isn't just a holiday, It represents the ongoing struggle for workers' rights and for social justice. It's a reminder that progress takes work, It takes awareness, education, and working together.
I love that. It's a call to action. It's like an invitation to get involved, to use your voice, to speak up for a better world.
And it's a reminder that history isn't just something in a textbook. It affects us right now, and it will continue to shape our future.
So true. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. We went into the history of International Workers' Day, learned about some powerful vocabulary, and even talked about bigger themes like social change and language.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
It has. To everyone listening, we'd love to hear what you thought about this deep dive. What stuck with you? What questions do you have? Come find us on our website or social media and share your thoughts. Let's keep talking about it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.